Listen, before I start, I am talking about Scotland. And I'm going to tell you there's tens of thousands of people who are right beside me who deliver this. So I'm going to tell you about a journey of prevention and a public health journey where we've reduced the number of homicides by 56% since 2004, and we've reduced non-sexual violence by 55%. So it's been a significant journey. I have got some horrible pictures in this. I will tell you, no fainting. But there must be some doctors in the audience. So, first off, I am not a gangbuster. There's something about being Scottish, having Taggart as a bit of history, and being a woman that makes people think, you know, that this must be about gangs. It is not about gangs. I deal with violence. I deal with people who commit violence on their own, in pairs, in groups. These guys and some women don't care about death or prison. They know that. What he's getting written across the top of his shoulders is only God can judge me. It wasn't quite true later on, but, you know. And he's been stabbed and will stab again. I mean, you see the knife wounds there. This was actually my favourite picture. I used to have this hanging in my house, which explained why I didn't get married for loads of years. So, and I know that you want to think that violence is a recent discovery. So this is Glasgow. We sadly have a bit of a history. And you can read this. It's depressing nowadays to take up one's paper and read of the daily catalogue of assaults and murders with knives. That's from the Evening Times in 1930. It has been around for a very long time. You have not just invented it. You might have realised it more because of the news, etc. And we had Percy Sillitoe, who was a chief constable between the wars. He went on to be the head of MI6. And he formed a group called the Untouchables, who were the group of the biggest cops. And they pretty much lifted everybody for knives and gave them 7 years. And there was a very famous line that said, and Sillitoe kicked a razor down the stank, and that was the end of the razor gangs. Well, of course it wasn't. We've got No Mean City and a city of gangs. We have a dreadful, dreadful culture of violence, and we had so. And then what happened was I went into Strathclyde Police. I've been 23 years in the police, and this came out in 2004. And what it said was that Scotland was the most violent country in Europe, and Glasgow was the most violent city. And you can imagine, Visit Scotland, we're bloody delighted, you know. And it's a really interesting thing because I was told not to do this. Sorry. United States was just over us. Now, you can do two things when you're presented with a group of stats. You can either think, well, these countries aren't doing this, and what we'll do is we'll just optimise what we're already doing, more stop search, more everything else, and we'll make it better. Or you can have a paradigm shift. And we had to have a paradigm shift. We had filled the jails. We were really, really good. We had a 98% detection rate for homicide, and it had made hee-haw difference to preventing violence. I never, ever want to meet another victim's family, but I absolutely will. I never want to see anybody. I don't want to read any tales of newspapers or autopsy reports, because there is no joy and there is no excitement. And for those of you who like Scandi noir and crime fiction, I don't like any of that. I see too much of it. So we decided, what else could we do? We're not going to use this criminal justice model because that's not really worked. And frankly, if jail worked, America would have no crime because they jail 3.5 million. It is not a paradigm that works. So we decided we'd do something else, and we'd start to look at it like a disease, a public health issue. Scotland is the only country where violence is a stated public health issue, just like TB, just like measles. And so we started to do surveillance. So there's a picture coming up that you might not like, but it's pretty interesting about why. Well, I do find this stuff interesting. So we started to ask, how many people are infected by this? Now, I could tell you about crime figures, but frankly, that's not the true picture. So I started to speak to my emergency room consultants, who are pretty spectacular in Scotland, and they started to count the amount of people who were coming in. And what we found was that we were only reporting 30% of violence. Who knew that people wouldn't want to report to the police who might be involved in crime? Because they're a victim one week, an offender the next. And we also had a very unusual problem where we had what was called the Glasgow Smile. And this is a horrible picture, please shut your eyes, where we had people would cut the face. We have one every 6 hours, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It is a catastrophic injury. It will affect you for almost 60 years. You will not get the girlfriend you want, the job you want, anything. So you have a problem, you have your surveillance. And then you have to look at your risk and protective factors. What I deal with is hopelessness and alienation. deindustrialisation, and life chances aren't created equally. Please don't kid yourself. Your life chances are any different or are different from people who I deal with whose life chances are just worlds away from where mine are. And it is a wicked problem. It is complex, it is complicated, and sometimes people just feel paralysed in inactivity because you just think, where do I start? I deal with people who have been neglected, abused, parental imprisonment, blighted by drugs and alcohol. And by the time they get to me, they're often traumatised because I'm dealing with them up here and in here, and actually we should have been dealing with them down there and doing something completely different. And we have clustering because sometimes, whilst there is no inoculation for violence yet, but if anybody out there wants to help me, then that would be great, it does actually operate like disease. You get clustering in certain areas. And these are all gang territories and actually, you know, murders and attempt murders. And, you know, some of these gang territories are incredibly old. Sometimes from the 1930s and 40s, and what keeps them going is the parents. Don't you go there, that's the high end, the low end, the mountain, the Gary Hill. You have to change some big social norms to be able to change this. So we decided, what would we do? And we looked at public health, and I'd like to say this was more by good judgment than luck. And I'm the only police member of the World Health Organization, and we started to look at how would you stop an epidemic? When people were looking at HIV and measles, you interrupt transmission. You then change behaviour, and then you change the social norms. That sounds incredibly simple. But parenting is by far the most important job that any of you will do. It's as close as it gets to being magic without being magic. And we started off a huge movement around looking at adverse childhood experiences, the building of resilience, the impact of trauma. And there's tens of thousands of us operate within our schools. When kids are trying to be excluded, we include them more. We've had an 80% reduction in our exclusions in Glasgow, and I'm incredibly proud of the teachers who do discretionary effort for me, because one more kid you'll keep in school is one less kid you have in jail. And supporting our parents to give our kids the best outcome is probably, never seems like a policing thing, but it absolutely is. Because if you give all the kids the skills in life, communication, problem solving, teamworking, communication and empathy to help them get through life and make good decisions about themselves without bumping into alcohol or drugs or violence, then can I tell you, I'll be able to retire. And then we had to focus on the teachable moments. Prosecco and Di Clemente, when are you motivated to change? So I used to be a really crap nurse at one point. It was really dreadful. I had to find a whole other professions. I've had a whole range of failed professions. But I used to hang around in the emergency rooms and wait till people were coming in with stab wounds and say, this isn't working out too well for you, big man. Are you thinking about changing? Which obviously explains why I'm not a nurse anymore. However, when I was in the emergency rooms, and we have some spectacular emergency consultants in Glasgow, we're almost the best. We were the best in the world, really, at treating knife injury. I think probably down here has got a lot more expertise now. And what I used to see was guys who were coming in being stabbed and they were on their phones, plotting, tit-for-tat violence. And we get a murder and another murder and another murder. So we started to put navigators into A&E departments to interrupt the violence cycle. And we've got them in hospitals all over Scotland now. This guy actually lived with a knife in his head. Sometimes you just, you know, that'd kill me. And then we started to intervene in violence. Now, this sounds quite old-fashioned, are you in a gang? It's sort of slightly dated now. But we decided, I'd been in Boston and Chicago doing some gang work over there, and we decided we'd get all the guys in the courtrooms. And we got them together and we said, next time that one of you commits a violent act, we're going to take out your whole group. Now, it was a bit of a bluff, because we couldn't really. And then we flashed up their pictures around the room, and you could see them pointing to each other, because we catch the feckless and the stupid. We have loads of CCTV. And we said, if you want out, and we did, it's complicated, it's a whole lecture in itself. If you want out, we're going to give you an opportunity to get out. And I thought nothing would happen. And we were overwhelmed by the amount of people who wanted a change of life. who didn't want to be in this because, can I tell you, there is nothing glamorous about this. Don't let anybody tell you that there's money to be made, or, it's one of these lives where you'll drive around in a really flash Range Rover. Your life is filled with chaos. You're going to be leaving the house thinking, is somebody going to stab me today? Is somebody going to be knocking on my mother's door saying somebody's killed your kid? Or you've just arrested them for a murder, because sometimes the look in the mum's face is exactly the same. And so we ran that for a number of years and tried to get people into, out of the roles. Sometimes we had to rehouse people. We had to do a whole range of extraordinary things. And then we had to create a movement. And I mean, you actually are involved in this movement, and because I had to go to everybody, we tried to train the fire service, because obviously the fire service were going to people's houses, and of course we don't have deep fat fryers anymore in Scotland because we now have oven chips. It's not making us any healthier. And so the fire service were putting in fire alarms. And so we're saying, when you go into the house and you see a bruise in someone's face, particularly if it's a woman, she's 89% likely to be a victim of domestic abuse. You need to ask her. Domestic abuse is absolutely part of this. We then started to train the vets, because we had a serial murder in Scotland and we had every female murder on a database. And when we looked back at the perpetrators, domestic abuse was in the background. We then started to train the vets how to intervene if they had a non-accidental injury of the dog, because we had dogs where somebody would break their leg to try and subjugate the other person. We had guinea pigs squeezed to death. It's horrendous. And so we trained the vets to then intervene. And then what they would do is they would have a dog in with a non-accidental injury, and they would then intervene with the woman. We had every dentist, because if I punch you in the face, the first thing you're likely to lose is your teeth. And we said to the dentists, what do you do when people are in your chair having lost your teeth? And the answer was nothing. And yet I had a dentist who'd said to me, I had a woman in my chair, domestic abuse again, who'd had cigarette burns in the top of her mouth, where somebody had forced her down and stuff. And I said, what did you say to her? And he said, I said nothing, because I didn't know what to say. I said, she needs to be asked. So we give them a formal language. This isn't an injury I would normally see in my chair. You're in a safe place. They document, they refer onwards. And you have to absolutely involve everybody. I speak to tens of thousands of people every single year and just ask them to do one thing. Volunteer, do something, make a difference. Because this is fundamentally about changing norms. We've crossed that Rubicon now. Scotland used to be, if I asked you 5 adjectives about a Scot, you'd probably say drunk, maybe a bit angry, bit tight. We don't want to be defined by violence or alcohol or anything else. We want to be defined by something completely different, a country that's fundamentally changed. 5 and a bit million of us. Some really significant challenges. But we need to create well-being. And Aaron Antonovsky, who was looked at people within the wars, and he looked at those who survived and thrived, and he said, for the creation of health, you need your life to be predictable, understandable, and manageable, or your individual will suffer chronic stress. We have high rate of suicide in Scotland, high rate of cardiac disease, and what we now think is that the constant cortisol and living in stress is changing us physiologically, it's making us ill. So we're not dying because we eat deep-fried pizzas or deep-fried Mars bars, although that is not helping. We are dying because we live lives of chronic stress. And so the most important thing that we've done is get people into work. Because the best way to stop a gun or a gang or a knife is a job. And it is the only thing that I'm proud of when I see people whose lives are fundamentally changed by earning square money, becoming part of society and not outside of it. And I was asked by someone quite well known, who I shan't tell you, who said to me, Karyn, what's the one thing I should do? And I said, listen, if I'd known the one thing, I'd have done it 15 years ago and ridden off into the sunset and said, that's it fixed. And people always want to talk to me about violence, and I came across this from Adam Gopnik in the New Yorker, and it probably explains it better than anybody else. And he said that epidemics seldom end with miracle cures. Most of the time in the history of medicine, you just have to chip around the edges. And that to see the dystopian despair around crime, you'd have to end poverty, cure the broken family. And actually, you don't. It just takes a series of small sanities. For someone to step forward and not back, to do something, to reach down and under and pull those who are less able along with you. That's how to end the crime wave. Thanks very much.